Good evening, everyone. Welcome along this evening to the 8th Northern Ireland Sheep Programme WebEx event. My name is Gareth Beacom. I'm a beef and sheep advisor here at CAFRE, and I'll be your chair for this evening. Please be aware, in case of any connectivity problems, that the event is being recorded and a link will be made available. It will also be posted on the CAFRE TV YouTube channel, where you'll also be able to find the previous 7 NI Sheep Programme events. We would love to be out holding these events on farm right now, but unfortunately we're still unable to do that due to the ongoing pandemic. We do, however, have 3 excellent presentations for you this evening, after which we'll have time for questions. We anticipate an event lasting approximately an hour and a half, so we'll aim to finish by 9:30. And I would like to encourage you all to submit your questions throughout the event. Laptop users can submit questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Mobile users can access the Q&A option via the 3-dot icon which appears when you tap your screen. Please select all panelists option when submitting your questions, and we will try to answer as many of these as possible. Your feedback is also very valuable to us, and a short survey will be made available at the end of the event, and I encourage you all to complete. I'll provide further details on this later. So I'd like to start this evening by welcoming and introducing our 5 panel speakers. First up, we have Senan White, CAFRE Beef and Sheep Advisor, and Senan's also the Northern Ireland Sheep Programme Manager. Our host farmer then for this evening is Dermot McAleese. Dermot is from Lochiel in County Antrim and is one of the Northern Ireland Sheep Programme participants. We've Darren Carty, a livestock specialist from the Irish Farmers Journal, and we also have Rachel Megarrell. Rachel's a CAFRE Beef and Sheep Advisor and is Dermot's Business Development Group Advisor. And finally, we have Brian Hanthorn, also a Beef and Sheep Advisor here at CAFRE. In addition to this, we have Pamela Gardner from CAFRE providing IT technical support throughout the event. So the title of tonight's event is Navigating Through a Winter of High Feed Costs. All earlier reports are indicating that farmers are going to be facing rising costs of rations this winter. However, on the plus side, there is good autumn grass cover still available, and farmers are generally reporting that ewes are in quite good condition going into the winter. So at this webinar this evening, we want to highlight some of the important management practices that farmers should be thinking of this time of the year in order to exploit these conditions. And we also want to provide you with some information to help you decide on the most suitable and cost-effective feed plan in the final stages of pregnancy to ensure for a good crop of lambs next spring. So as I said, we have 3 presentations this evening. We're going to start with Dermot. Dermot is a hill sheep farmer from Lochiel, County Antrim, and Dermot's going to provide us with a background to his sheep enterprise and will highlight some of the practices he undertakes in relation to preparing for winter feeding, especially this year with rising feed costs. Rachel Megarrell will then provide us with some explanation on the NAR4 silage testing machine, as well as some practical advice on preparing for winter feeding this year. And finally, Brian Hanthorn will give an overview of the sheep rations, what to look out for in them, and some of the savings that can be made through acting upon silage analysis. Darren Carty will also be available to answer questions as one of the project partners. At this stage, I'm now going to hand over to Senan and Dermot. During Senan and Dermot's presentation, please note that if you wish to enlarge the screen display, you can do so by clicking on the expand view or full screen icons found at the bottom right of your screen. Thank you.
Okay, Gareth, thanks very much, and welcome everybody, and hope you're all well this evening. Folks, just before we start, just want to give you a wee quick, as I said, Gareth has mentioned, there will be a couple of presentations. There'll also be a change of slides. They're showing a wee short PowerPoint and then I'll be chatting to Rachel for a while before we get talking to Brian about the rations at the end. So before I do go any further, just personally like to thank my colleagues on here this evening, Gareth, Rachel, Brian and Pamela, for helping out on these webinars. It does take a lot of people, and I really do appreciate their help as well. And also like to thank all the industry bodies who have helped promote these and the other previous events we've had throughout the year, so that is appreciated. Okay, folks, you know the background to the programme by now. We have the main 8 focus areas, but the one we're just going to focus on this evening is basically on number 5 there, driving performance through grazing management. Now, basically, the point of that there is at the very bottom. If you're growing more grass throughout the year and you can use it better, you hopefully should have more silage and better utilisation through the year, and hopefully better quality silage. So that's why the background to this. So basically, folks, without further ado, I would like to introduce our host farmer this evening. I'd like to thank him for be agreeing to speak to us this evening about his farm. So I'd like to welcome Dermot McAleese. Are you there, Dermot?
Evening.
Good man, good man. Right, Dermot, maybe you tell us who've what here, and then maybe a bit about the farm.
Well, this is just me and my father here, about farm up here in North Van, from the beef and sheep farm. Calves sold as sucklers, and then the sheep, maybe lambs, we sold store lambs and then new lambs. The farm would be broke up into 3 main blocks, ranging from 400 feet right up to 1600 feet. And then we sort of 2 different types of ewe types, mainly black-faced Scotch ewes, and then some mule and mule Tex ewes in the better farm.
Okay. And like your ground, Dermot, it is fairly split out. To say I've been up several times, and it's a beautiful part of the country. This, folks, is just up on the right. Your screen is the village of Lochgiel. This is Dermot's. This would be your main block, Dermot. This would be the powerhouse, so to speak. For you rely a lot on this ground. This is your home ground, your home yard.
Yeah, that's about our best ground around the home farm, so it's sort of been pushed quite a lot, that ground, from lamb and sheep, 2 cuts of silage, cows graze, and then ewes getting tipped on at the back end of the year.
So like that ground definitely has to work for you, Dermot. Like
Yeah.
it earns its keep.
Yes.
So that's your best ground, Dermot. And just showing here, folks, this is only a couple of them. As Dermot says, there's several parcels of ground. This is just one of them. I can just see where the cursor is now. You may wonder what these are, but they're not Dermot's. But in that area, and a lot of areas, these are wind turbines. So you can imagine the type of terrain that's up there. So that would be some of it as well. Again, just showing you some more of this ground continuing on, and you can see the forest area, so it is quite high. This, Dermot, would be your heavier grazing, or should I say the hill grazing?
Yeah, that's just a picture from the middle of the mountain, just looking up to the top of it. Just shows you what type of grazing's on that mountain, just sort of just pure, mainly heather, just.
So basically, that's for the hill ewes would mainly be, Dermot. Like
Yeah, for this, the blackface ewes would graze.
Okay. Now, we just a wee video here, folks, and Dermot's just going to talk through it. Just basically, this is a wee video Dermot took there earlier on in the year, just showing some of the ground and some of the hill and the cattle as well. So maybe just chat through, Dermot, and obviously there's a bit of forestry as well, so maybe just chat us a wee bit.
Well, this would be sort of our upland lying ground for the mule ewes would graze, and also my suck cows would spend the summer up here. And then just up behind the cows there's a bit of wetter ground that had always problems, just get growing grass. I planted it in the ASI scheme as agri-forest.
So that's the EFS scheme as well, Dermot. So
Yes.
And this ground here, Dermot, like would you cut some of it, or would you get any extra grass off it, or?
That's mainly grazing, but if any extra grass comes, if I just cut off, round baled it and cut off if we have any extra grass.
Right, so it is. You have to utilize every bit of it. You say because you can't rely. You have to. The best is pushed down at the bottom. So, yes, a wee bit more. This obviously would love to get out onto the farm. As I say, it's a beautiful area. But this is the best we can do, Dermot. So maybe just tell us a bit about the farm itself and the stock.
Well, like I said, we're traditional Scotch blackface ewes. They graze in the harder hill, and then we keep some mule ewe lamb or mule ewes, and also we'd keep some of the older blackface ewes, take them to the better farm just to get an extra couple of years out of them. Cross them with the Bluefest Leicester tick for mule ewe lambs. That'd be our main selling lamb on the farm.
So your stores will be a big thing, Dermot. That'll be your main in that area, I suppose.
All the male lambs will be sold to stores. That's something that I'd like to change maybe in the future.
Well, like obviously last year, Dermot. When did you start selling lambs? How have they been doing compared to last year, or when do you start?
Much same time as selling. Just sort of start selling the start of August and just keep going every week, just with different groups of lambs till we're sort of sold.
And what do you think? What do you think money-wise, Dermot? Is it hard to know? Hopefully your benchmarking will tell a story, but what do you think?
Well, I say this year we're definitely up £10 to £15 ahead overall, all the lambs that were sold.
Good. And I say the last point there, Dermot, obviously back to the main yard as well. You lamb in where you can, but you have to obviously lamb outside as well. So
yeah, one of the flocks lambs inside, but then the mountain blackfish ewes, they all lamb outside in the fields right around the farmyard.
Right. So is everything brought down then, Dermot?
Yes, everything was brought down for lambing time. The better ewes, the male ewes, they'd be housed at Christmas time just after scanning.
Okay, right, very good. I'll say we'll just maybe see some of these now. And this is just an wee video of some of the different types of lambs here, Dermot.
Yes, it's a picture of my twin sheep, just sort of a mixture of mule ewes and blackface ewes. Just that was them coming in for a dose there in the summertime.
And they definitely are. Credit to you. Some good cross textiles here as well, Dermot. So like you're definitely producing quality stock. And next, Dermot, we'll cover the older horn ewes right here.
Yeah, it's just a picture of some older horn ewes that have come off the harder mountain to the better mountain, just or better ground, just for an extra couple of years to get out of them.
Yeah. So obviously, as I said, Dermot, you have a bit of ground at the home. You know, you have to use it, but it's a ground away out the mountain of ground that you have to use as well. And obviously, it has to be grazed and kept right. Your ewes, Dermot, they are out there, so they have to be. This is how do you manage them on the hill?
But they more or less stay out there all year. So that's my twin ewes. Once they were scant, they have to go back up to the mountain, and then that's me just bringing silage up to them during the winter time.
So again, Dermot, we're going back to the quality of silage. You know, the theme of the night. Like, there's not much out there at that time of year, so you have to make sure that the whatever you're bringing out is best of quality. You do the odd licks as well, Bernard or Dermot. Sorry,
Yes, well, wee bits of licks, but mainly they also would supplement with meal. Would bring up meal with a snacker, and they'd be fed meal up there too.
Okay. And I think, Dermot, the ewe lambs, what way they're the same more or less, Dermot.
Well, they go to winter grazing, and then after winter grazing, that's them come home after winter grazing, just feeding silage just to get enough grass. To the horn lambs, they'll head up to the mountain middle of April time, so that's them just on some better ground just to get enough grass that they can go to the mountain.
And the crossbred lambs,
They'll stay in that farm they're on there. That's sort of the poor bit of that farm. They'll stay there, and that's where they'll stay for the rest of their life in that farm.
okay. So usually the horn lambs go up to where they have to work,
Yes.
and that's fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Dermot, just give people a bit of a realization of what the situation is there and what the area you're farming in. So, Dermot, as I say, like it doesn't seem that long, but it's 2 years ago, nearly over 2 years ago, since we sat down and we went through with everybody on the farm and in the program. And I say I would encourage all farmers to do this at some stage. Is go through and have some sort of farm goals. You have these three here, Dermot, as examples, obviously. But what way things moved about a bit, Dermot, or what's been happening?
Well, year one and two, I still sat down on a health plan with a vet. That was sort of good to talk over things to see I should change or maybe look at on the farm. OP, AIDS, scanned the use, and was quite happy with the results. Something to just keep an eye on. EID, yes, I can see a benefit, but I think I'm going to change that and push that back a year or two. I think more importantly, get the grass improved and reseeding, get improving the farm more important to me at this present time.
No, that's fine. As I say, folks, any goals, as long as you have them, Dermot, and I know I've said to you a few times with the AD, but you've been very honest and say, look, I want to do the other thing, and that's fine. Like, it's at the end of the day, it's your farm. You have to be happy with what you're doing. And as I say, grass is a major impact on your farm, and you want to make sure you grow as much as you can, as good a quality as you can. And that's definitely what you're doing. So, like, just on that, Dermot, this is a bit of reseeding you done this year.
Yes, this is one of my silage fields. Just after I took the first cut of silage, I decided it needed reseeded, so it was burnt down. Gave it a run with the rotavator twice. Decided to go for the rotavator, maybe me being lazy. Didn't want to lift stones, so I thought I'd try this method of reseeding. So quite happy the way it worked. It rotavated twice, lime on it, and then gave it a wee power hara just to get a finer seed bed before it was sowed out.
Excellent. Well, there's nothing wrong with not wanting to lift stones, Dermot. I wouldn't criticise any man for that. And then Dermot, obviously that's the before, and this is the after. So I think you're fairly pleased. Like, that was one of the nights we got out with a grip to your farm. I think it was going to be September time, Dermot.
Yeah, it was sowed out in the middle of July, but it really struggled for the first month because it had a real dry spell. But once it grew, it just jumped out of the ground. It nearly got ahead of me a wee bit, so it did.
But you got it sorted. Now,
Yeah.
as I say, folks, that there doesn't happen by magic. As I'm sure you know, like the soils are tested, and what's needed is put on. And Dermot is very much to the fore of that, and we'll chat about that a wee bit later on. So, next bit, Dermot, obviously, we'll say people familiar with the targets that we have, and I say no matter whether you're a hill farmer, lowland farmer, suckler farmer, no matter what it is, always should have targets. And these, Dermot, obviously have come from Your 2020 figures have come from more or less your benchmarking, and your targets is what we've set. And I'll say, folks, just on the benchmarking, I would encourage any farmers to do it if you haven't already done it. And obviously we will be within the programme, we'll be starting that again. This year is soon over, so we'll be hopefully collecting those figures early next year, because as I say, there's no point doing benchmarking and doing a report on it if you're not going to look at it until the middle of the year, because a lot of the decisions, it's nearly past the time of it. So I would encourage anybody that hasn't done it to get it done and do it as early as you can in the year. So, well, Dermot, anyway, your fertility levels, Dermot, I don't think there's anything you're really too concerned about there.
No, I say, and that the level I'm quite happy to be at. I don't think I'd want to push much more.
Yeah, as I say, for near 1.6, or you're there or nearabouts, Dermot, for hill ewes with the ground you have, I think you're more than happy, and we'll maybe discuss some of that later on. Weaning percentage, obviously, always like a few more lambs sold from that. Your store lambs, Dermot, that's maybe somewhere you want to maybe change a wee bit.
Yeah, it's definitely a key issue I'd like to look at and try and get a lot more lambs, or try and get lambs away as stores, or no, away as fats. Sorry.
Yeah. It's no, it is. It's a good year, and you want to try to. Your numbers, Dermot, have been, you're moved up a wee bit.
Yeah, we're running 530 ewes at the minute, so getting near whereabouts I want to be at with the ewe numbers.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, Dermot, there is really yourself, and labour is a big issue as well at lambing time. Your father's there. Help is a big issue, so it's all right talking. You can only go so far.
Yes, help would be a big issue come lambing time for me.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, and the gross margin there, folks, at 60 quid is well up in the benchmarking, well over the top 25%. So it is a credit to Dermot and his father for that level of performance. So we're just going through some of this briefly, Dermot. We've obviously talked about the health plan, and I'm just going to show this next slide a wee bit about your paper-based system for recording, and that's, you have an excellent system, and a credit to your father for many years having a good recording system. So I can understand, when the EAD, you push it off a wee bit, you have a good recording system. The grassland and obviously the soil health we're going to chat about. But maybe just talk about the recording system, Dermot, and just bring up this wee graph here that you've, one of your many graphs, I think, you can do, Dermot. Yeah, maybe chat a wee bit about that.
Well, that's just one example of some of the records I keep. That's just the scanning of the ewes over the last 20 years, just sort of comparing new numbers to scanning percentage, just of one of the flocks, just to see how it's worked out over the years.
And it has, like, certain things have gone up, certain breeds have gone out, Dermot, and you have generally get improved. So again, folks, doesn't matter what really sort of records you have, as long as you're keeping some sort of records. And it's a credit, say, to Dermot and his father Patsy for those level of records. It was very, very, very impressive. Now, Dermot, the main part that's kind of what we're focusing in on this evening, obviously, is you're growing that bit of home ground. You're growing a lot of grass. You need to grow a lot of grass. You need to grow quality grass. But this is the mainstay of it, Dermot, your soil analysis.
Yes, exactly. It's the foundation of any farm, just the soil. So that's the home farm there. As you can see, pH is okay, and phosphorus and potash is ideal. The other farm, there's improvements to be made. One of the issues I'm going to look at is taking slurry up to that rather than just spreading it around the easy fields around home, the dry fields. Slurry is getting it's worth its money now. It's not just a waste product you have to look at as a valuable commodity in the farm.
Definitely. Obviously, like, there's no point in hiding the fact with the fertilizer prices or the way that they're being reported. Anyway, lime, as you know, Dermot, is the most important fertilizer you would have on a farm, and obviously addressing a pH deficit is definitely worth. Dermot, you've been very, very strong on that.
This was the last couple of years. Like, I've done 160 ton of lime. That's the cheapest fertilizer you can get. So out the pH, there's no point spending dear money in fertilizer.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd say, like, just on that hill ground, Dermot, like, that's work in progress, and you're doing where you can when you can get onto it. It is wetter, it's hillier, it's all those things that hill ground is, and that's only, that's a broad sample of your hill grounds, because obviously there's more to it than that. And just on another side point as such, within the program themselves, like there's all the participants, there's over 1,000 ton of lime has been spread in the last 2 years. So it is a credit to all the other farmers in the program that they've seen the value, they've soil tested, and they've seen the value of it to grow grass. And say especially now with the price of fertilizer. So say that's a fundamental, and Dermot has put that across very well. So again, Dermot, this is what we're coming on to tonight. Obviously, the value of silage. You need the grass to grow. If you don't have the grass growing, you're not going to make the silage. But this then, Dermot, is a sample of. I think Rachel actually done this sample. And this is your second cut, Dermot.
Yes, that's my second cut silage. Yes.
How have you? Are you happy or not, or what do you think?
I'm happy enough for a second cut. It's good, you know. Okay, maybe a wee bit drier would have helped, but other than that, it's for a second cut grass. It's good, you know. I can't complain.
Exactly. Yeah, there's nothing much like it is. Like that's the weather, Dermot. You know, you have a D value of 70, an ME energy of 11.2, protein of 13. You know, pH very well. You know, there's nothing to complain about that. Now, this is only like this is what you're just feeding at the minute, Dermot. But this is your second. Sorry, this next coming up is your first cut silage. You've got this done through a nutritionist, Dermot. Maybe tell me a wee bit about that.
Yeah, it's just another company. Nutritionist I'd work with, he'd sample my silage, and then we'd sit down and maybe make up a meal blend for me. So I've been working with him a couple of years now, and it's definitely paying off.
And I say, Dermot, I think what was his quote with that silage?
Rocket fuel.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really good silage. 30% dry matter, 14.5, over 14.5 protein, D value 76, energy level, which is a massive importance for sheep, 12.1. So, you know, this is proven that Dermot can do it and other farmers can do it, you know. And I know Brian will probably reiterate this, you know, silage quality has got better, especially us working through the BDG groups, and I think Brian will probably reiterate that when we've come on. Your silage, you're aiming for better silage every year, Dermot?
Yeah, it's just something I've been looking at. Just years ago, I seen these dairymen making great silage, and I thought it was something. Maybe as a traditional beef and sheep man, you always went for bulk, and it's something I thought, well, if they can make good silage and cut their meat well, why can't I? So over the years, I've been just proving the size and cutting back the meal.
Good man, excellent. Right, Dermot, we're nearly finished with your section. So just a couple of things, Dermot. Obviously, we've kind of covered the silage analysis there. Your strive for quality. You obviously need a quantity as well, Dermot. There's no point in denying that. Your sheep housing, Dermot. When do they go in? What time do they go in? How long are they in for? That?
Well, it's upland sheep, the male sheep, and no blackfish sheep. They'll be scamped around Christmas time, and they get housed then, and then they'll be on silage to a certain stage, and then once the meal gets introduced, it'll be introduced through a diet feeder.
Okay, and then when do you? So it all depends on the grass growth that you have, Dermot. Really, when they go in.
Well, they always just get in just around scanning time. That's just we scan around Christmas, and that's when they just get in. Just traditional way it works.
Okay. Now, winter grazing, Dermot, I think you mentioned you take a bit of it, or you've this last number of years. How have you found that compared to feeding outside or housing, or has that been good, bad, or?
Well, for the last 5 years, we've started taking winter grazing, and I think it has paid off. We used to not send anything away, and new lands would have stayed in a tight wee bit of ground, and you gave them meal. But since they went away, it's really improved my ewe flock because my ewe lambs are doing better. Also, the last 3 years, I've took a bit of winter grazing for about 100 of my ewes off the hard hill, and that's definitely just gave me a wee bit more breathing space at tipping time and a bit more extra grass, and that's paid dividends too for my lambing percentage.
Yeah, I think we can see that as well. And then just a final wee bit, like autumn rotation, it's fairly topical now at the minute and closing off fields. What way you work? I suppose a lot of it's just maybe your home ground would be the main.
Well, upland farms just got closed off there this week, just as tipping was sort of coming to a finish with it. The other ground, there's still ewes getting tipped on it, and it'll be another couple of weeks till I can really get it closed off and ewes get pushed back up to the mountain after tipping.
So basically, hopefully, in a few weeks, everything will be closed off, Dermot. That's your aim in the middle of December. That's excellent. Right, Dermot, just the last slide, you'd be happy to hear. just some of the things, Dermot, like we've sat down and say an honest conversation. So maybe you just chat through some of the things that you're hoping to do, or some things you've learned and things you maybe want to take forward.
Well, definitely, I think improving grass and soil fertility, like that's the foundation of the farms. It's something, yeah, you have to get right. If you can't get right, everything else just maybe doesn't fall together the same. Rams, EBV, yes, it's something I'd like to look at, but it depends. The breeders start needing to test the rams, and if they can't do that, I can't buy them. So weighing lambs, EDS is something I definitely see the benefit of. Like, you don't know how your lambs are doing without weighing them. It's something you can pick up on. Body condition scoring, something I have been doing and would regularly do every time sheep run, just check them. Sometimes you can get a surprise. You think it looks good till you put your hand on, and you can get a bit of shock. And then worming, it's becoming a big issue. Resistance against worming. It's with the BTD now. I have been doing some dung samples and before a dose, rather than just getting routine dose, to test and see if you need to dose, if your dose is working too. And then taking lambs to heavier weight, yeah, that's definitely something I have to try and do, is get more lambs away as fat rather than stores.
Excellent. I'd say it's good to have those goals. So thank you very much. I'll say just a minor point there. The worming stuff, we hopefully within the program will be running a bit of a test with the rest of the farmers. If anybody hasn't seen the last webinar with Trevor Nixon, we did a wee fecal egg count reduction test. So we are hoping to run that out to see and see what effect that is across the rest of the farmers in the program. So Dermot, thank you very much. I'll let you have a rest now, and I'm going to stop sharing for a wee minute now, folks, and we're bringing on my colleague Rachel and Rachel Megarrell. So hopefully we will have the wee video here of Dermot's silage testing, and hopefully that will come up. Okay, and Rachel, are you there?
I'm here. Yes, thanks, Lennon.
Right, go, Rich. Good to hear. Good to hear. So we'll just go play this wee video, Rachel, and maybe just chat through what's happening here.
Yep. Okay, good evening, everyone. The first thing that you can see in the video clip here is Dermot taking a core sample from his silo. Basically, a core sample is generally used to give an early assessment of silage quality. Moving on next, you're going to see Dermot collecting a sample from the pit face. Using this method gives an idea of the quality of the silage that's been fed out to the animals at this point in time. So you can see Dermot moving across the pit face. He's moving from left to right, top to bottom in a W shape, a bit like doing your soil sample in your field. And this gives a representative sample. Onto the NIR machine that you can see in the picture here. It's a portable piece of kit. It gives an on-the-spot result. To the right-hand side of that, you can see a scanner attached, and this is called a spectrometer. At the moment on the screen, it's running a baseline scan in preparation for scanning the sample that you see in the bowl, and this has been thoroughly mixed prior to scanning. So what I'm going to do now is use the scanner and apply light pressure downwards across that silage sample. And the NIR works by using the spectrometer to scan the silage. This is repeated 5 times, taking approximately 200 scans at each point. And when the sample is complete, it has taken about 1,000 scans of the silage sample. Finally, the machine provides a result for the key parameters in relation to your silage quality. So you'll see your dry matter, your D value, your ME, your crude protein, and your pH. So this is used a lot within the business development groups as a service to our farmers, because it provides them with an instant result, and then they can use that to formulate an appropriate ration for their livestock.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Right, Rachel, thank you very much. I know it was a very short video. I just want to give people a wee bit of a taster of what the NIR machine is capable of doing, and hopefully we're back on. Rachel, maybe is your video on there?
Yeah.
Okay, there you are, folks. So this is Rachel. I say Rachel is Dermot's BDG advisor and a colleague of mine for a number of years. So basically, Rachel was thinking about this, obviously with the webinar, and was thinking. I jotted down a few things here that maybe farmers would be thinking about. Just maybe go back to the testing there, Rachel. Obviously, you mentioned go up and down the W shape. How many samples should you take if you're doing the core, and why would you do the core as opposed to the sample?
I mean, the core can be done before the pit is open, and so you can get a sort of an advance warning as to what to expect with your silage quality. So Dermot would have went along the top of the pit in a diagonal shape and take 3 full cores there. And just when you go down first, make sure you discard that first wee bit. Obviously, that's the top part of your silo, and there might be a bit of wastage and stuff there. So it's just taking it on down lower. And usually there's a marker on the core. So if anybody wants to take a core sample of their silo and they're in a business development group, get in touch with your advisor and they can get a core out to you. In comparison to that then, as I said, with the pit face, that's what's actually been fed out to the animals at this point in time. So moving along in that W shape gives a good mix of the sample, and Dermot was probably taking about 9 or 10 samples there, but it really would depend on the width of your silo. So the wider it is, the more you would take, and then that can be appropriately mixed up and split out.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Well, obviously, Rachel, you've been working, with the NIR machine and obviously across the other groups as well. It's maybe a bit early for some of the sheep farmers, but is there anything you've noticed in trend silage quality anything that's come through?
Well, you're probably right in saying it is a bit early for the sheep farmers out there. However, the one thing I would say is that every year, and I'm sure all the advisors will agree, that we see a huge variation in silage quality. But I would say the general trend year on year is that silage quality is improving. So that's really, really good. Farmers are really focused on improving silage quality to reduce the level of concentrate input that needs to go in there. I mean, if we take Dermot as an example, when we were out that day saying and working towards this webinar, we could see, silage analysis from 10, 12 years ago, and you can see the dramatic improvement that Dermot has made to this point in time now, where he's got the rocket fuel first cut silage. So that's an ideal position to be in, but it's having those records and seeing that improvement year on year. If you're not testing, you have nothing to benchmark yourself against.
Exactly, and acting upon it as well. So that's Dylan. What else had I down here? Yeah, it's maybe slightly different, Rachel. But as was Gareth said at the start, there's a fair bit of grass, and it's been a good growing year. And obviously the weather's predicted to change. There's a fair reports of ewes coming in visibly very good order at the minute. Is that safe to assume, Rachel, or what would you say to some of the things that they look all right? They're bound to be all right.
Well, it's probably a fair enough comment, Senan, to say that ewes are in good enough condition. However, the key thing that you mentioned there was visually. So never assume that the ewes are okay. It's like Dermot had said earlier on, you can get a bit of a shock if you bring them in and you have made assumptions the whole way through, and then you suddenly put your hand on them and you think, goodness, these ewes are too lean and it's really too late to do anything about it. So I mean, that regular condition scoring is really, really important, and just keeping those ewes on a level plane of nutrition, so you have them in good condition for tupping, and you want to keep them in good condition. You don't want any dramatic swings in body condition, through that mid-pregnancy phase coming into late pregnancy time. So try and not, just try and keep them level as much as possible. And don't forget, it is really important to body condition score regularly.
Yeah,
Nutrition for the ewe is key.
Yeah, and that has kind of changed in a way. When it was said, "Oh, if you lose half a score, it's not going to make an awful lot of difference." But now I think we're trying to. The advice should be keep her as level as you can.
I suppose the problem is then, and if now once we've passed tupping time, if we graze that ewe very tightly and almost hunger, then when we get to that point in late pregnancy, we have to try and put that back on. So it's almost counterproductive. So it's much easier for her just to remain in a stable body condition the whole way through. I mean, I suppose what we have to also realise is that, in terms of your ewe and getting lambs on the ground and getting living lambs, our input costs have increased. Yes, our lamb price, farm gate lamb price has also increased, but those input costs are rising accordingly. So every lamb that you can get on the ground and give a good start and get out the gate, really pays off for you now more than ever, really.
Yeah, no, exactly. So very good. What else are we doing here? Oh, yeah. Well, obviously, say Dermot's maybe housing around Christmas time. Is there any anything the farmers you're coming across doing anything different? Housing, or is there anything? Say somebody who's considering housing for the first time. Anything they should think about?
I suppose anyone that's considering housing for the first time, just again back to that message of supplying good quality forage initially. Obviously have this analysed, which is what we're touching on this evening, the whole way throughout this evening. When we're thinking of feed access, that's really critical. Particularly if you're feeding concentrates, it's a big one. Obviously, every ewe needs to be able to come forward and feed comfortably at the trough so that there's no bullying going on. And I know Brian is going to touch on space allowance later on in his own presentation, so I'll not say too much about that. Don't make any drastic changes to their feed as another big one. You know, they can't cope very well with changes to the diet. It affects the pH in the rumen. Make sure you offer the feed at the same time every day. Don't be coming in at 6 one day and 9 the next day and 12 the next day. They don't cope well with that either. Even just thinking of simple things like large amounts of concentrate, split them into 2 meals, make sure the ewes have plenty of space to lie down. And again, Brian is going to touch on that as well. And I suppose one of the key things saying is, you're going to have your ewes scanned, so grouping them up according to litter size so that you can feed them efficiently is the big thing.
Yeah, especially this year with the price of meal, there's other things men have done rattling each week and, maybe tightening up, not feeding until they have to feed as well. So we things out there. A slightly different one here, Rachel, of down, the animal health stuff, especially fluke. I'm just thinking about, Trodax potentially, I think it is going off the market. What about fluke issues or fluke treatment, sorry, should I say?
Well, I suppose that is the big one around housing time in relation to animal health. It is your fluke control. I suppose key to remember that with a fluticide, there's no residual effect. So if you dose them today and they go back out to graze, they're going to pick up again very, very quickly. So they will reinfect. So that fluke dose is crucial that it's given at housing. So at the point of housing, not turning the ewes back out and then housing them at the weekend. Do it there and then when you're housing. Follow the SCOPS guidelines. There's lots of really, really good practical information that can be found on their website to do with the detection and the treatment of fluke. I suppose you're talking there about the removal of Trodax. So if you're thinking at housing, you're probably looking at something that's going to kill both your mature and your adults at that stage. So something with the active ingredient Closantel in it. I suppose the one thing I would say, Shannon, is fluke is really, really difficult to manage, and it's really on a farm-to-farm basis. So it's very, very individual to every person's farm. So, as always, consult with your vet to come up with a proper control plan. Whilst we can advise, obviously we're not vets, so it's good to seek their advice.
No, that's dead on. Just a couple more here, Rachel. Obviously, conscious of time. Obviously, very dry summer. Hopefully, farmers got in. Dermot, obviously, the weather at times is fairly good, fairly bad. You have to jump with it. But if farmers have fairly dry silage this year, feeding ewes, anything to be aware of, or anything you should be keeping an eye out for?
Well, I suppose the big one, saying is prolapse, and we do hear this quite often. So with your drier silages, if you think even when you're feeding that out, just the palatability of it, a very, very dry silage, even thinking about the amount that they need to take in. So if you compare a kilo of 20% dry matter silage, that equates to 5 kilos fresh weight. Compare that to a silage that's 40% dry matter. It's half of that. So it takes much longer for her to get through it. And say someone has a very dry silage in a silo, you're running the risk there of spoilage and heating at the face because it is taking you much longer to get through it. And just as always, when the ewes are housed with the likes of that dry diet, just make sure they have plenty of access to clean water.
Well, and I think the last point here, Rachel, I know your answer anyway, but if there's anybody logged on here tonight that has never analysed before, maybe hasn't analysed for a while, what's your message for them?
Well, it's something that we always preach, isn't it? How can you manage something that you haven't measured? And that's very, very true, especially when it comes to this year when we are, as you say, the title of this evening is navigating through a winter of high feed costs. So you want to get yourself a benchmark, see where you're at and what do I need to, what's the minimum input that I need to put in here with my ewes. So carry out your analysis to determine the quality of the silage that you actually have available. Otherwise, you're stabbing in the dark, you're guessing, and you could be overfeeding dramatically or you could be underfeeding, and you don't want to be in either of those camps. You want to be providing it precisely to your ewe to meet her energy requirements. As you said earlier on, when you're looking at the ME of the silage, that's so critical. And you can see there, Dermot's, it's on a par with some of the feeds out there at 12.1 ME, But Brian is going to next demonstrate, the amount that can be saved by feeding the high quality silage versus the low quality silage. So, you know, that'll maybe be a bit of an eye opener. But, you know, it's like everything, it's only a guide. Silage analysis is only a guide. And you would need to obviously regularly check as you're moving through your pit as well, just to make sure that that silage is constant.
Excellent. Rachel, thank you very much. Some great advice there, folks, and I appreciate Rachel for spending the time here and going through that, folks. So, folks, we're next going to hand over now to Brian Hanthorn. So I'm going to share the presentation again. So hopefully this will come up. Just move on. There we are. Hopefully everybody see that. Brian, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, folks, I'd just like to introduce Brian Hanthorn, a colleague of mine for many years. So Brian, I say, is just going to cover for the next wee while feeding the yo this winter. So Brian, over to yourself. And sorry, folks, I'm going to move the slides on for Brian. So
okay, thank you, Sam. Okay, folks, tonight I'm going to look at feeding the yo this winter, really with more a sort of perspective on the lowland as opposed to maybe the hill. So these are sort of the areas I'm going to look at. I'm going to look a wee bit at high lambing percentages, trying to keep those lambs living, nutrition in the late pregnancy, and feeding the yo, feeding to reduce lamb and yo mortality both together. Looking at silage and concentrates, looking at some straights and the prices and the way that's went up over the last year, and then some costings on meal itself. Okay, Shannon. Folks, you know, within business development groups, there's a lot of benchmarking going on there, and as well as we get a lot of physical data coming in, as well as the financial stuff. But like the average lambs reared per yo for 2021 was 1.53, and we saw some of Dermot's figures, the way that's changed over the years. I was just saying to my colleagues, like back about 10 years ago, the average reared within benchmarking was about 1.4. I know every year is slightly different, but the overall trend would be going up, which is very good to see. In this figure, there's obviously yo lambs included in that, and hill yos and all combined together. It is on the up. If we could ever rear like 0.2 lambs extra per yo, it's currently worth, with the lamb price where it is at the moment, it's worth about £25 extra per yo output per yo. That might not mean an awful lot, you know, on a yo basis, but like if we multiply it up for a 200 yo flock, it actually equates to about £5,000 extra output for that flock, which is a massive amount of money. The downside to all this is, you know, if we're trying to produce more lambs, we need better nutrition, and that's what we're going to look at. Okay, Shannon. I suppose when I started BDGs or even started into advisory work, you know, a lot of sheep farmers fell into one of two camps. They're either underfeeding their ewes or they're overfeeding them. If we look at underfeeding, really what happens, we get more metabolic disease like twin lamb disease, or if they don't take twin lamb disease, we get a lot of low birth weights in lambs. These lambs, they've lower vigor, survivability, they're more difficult to keep living. The ewes themselves, the colostrum levels are lower, and the subsequent milk yield from that is also lower. Some of these ewes, the lamb down pretty thin, they've actually a very poor maternal bonding with their lambs. In other words, they don't really like their lambs. They want to reject them rather than actually rear them. And this can actually lead to like slow finishing lambs in the long run. On the other side of the coin, overfeeding, it's expensive. You know, it can lead to increased birth weights with more lambing difficulty. On the good bit of it is, you know, you're getting a lot of good colostrum supply. There's very good bonding with the ewe and the lambs together, and with faster growing lambs. So really, you know, those are both sides of the equation. We want to get the feeding right, which is probably somewhere in the middle. Okay, Sam. So look, this is what's really happening in early pregnancy compared with late pregnancy. This big pink object in the middle of these sheep is the rumen, and the object behind it is a growing fetus or lambs. You can see in early pregnancy the rumen's quite big. As time goes on, this rumen gets reduced in size because the lambs are growing. So that's reducing our capacity to hold energy in the ewe or to get energy in there. So our intake's probably going down slightly. On the other thing that's actually happening is as the lambs are growing, they're needing more energy. So this is presenting us with a big problem. Okay, so 70%, and a lot of you will know this already, 70% of the fetal growth takes place in the sort of last 6 to 8 weeks. So the energy demand is going up dramatically. The ewe's appetite can be going down slightly at this stage. So look, what we really need to get into the ewe there is concentrated energy in the form of some sort of meal. Silage can do a lot of it, and we've talked a lot about good silage quality, which is great. But in most instances, in twin bearing ewes, like silage alone is seldom adequate. And we'll look at some figures later on that. Okay, Shannon. Just talking about feeding, very important to get the feeding right to produce the right amount of colostrum. When a lamb's born, and again, you will all know this, when a lamb's born, there's no immunity to disease at all. All initial immunity comes in the form of antibodies in the colostrum. Ewes must have adequate feeding to produce this quality and quantity of colostrum. Again, if we don't get low colostrum production means really, or low production of colostrum or even intake will lead to more watery mouth and scars and other issues with the lambs. The other thing is we must have colostrum at birth. We can't have delayed colostrum production. We want when the ewe actually lambs down, we must have colostrum there to try and get the lambs to suckle within the first 6 hours of life. It's critical to get that in because after that their ability to take up the colostrum is reduced dramatically. Okay, so this is just a wee bit of work here in this table from the Sheep Veterinary Society back about 10 years ago, and it looked at 2 groups of sheep, both black-faced sheep. There was a well-fed group and an underfed group. They both were expecting twin lambs, as you can see from the table there. The total weight of the black-faced lambs in the well-fed group was just shy of 8 kilos, coming in there at 7.9. But if we look there at the colostrum production when the first hour after lambing was 715 mils, which is quite a bit. So those sheep have actually been well fed. They've produced a lot of colostrum, which is great. And within 18 hours, they've produced 1,805 mils. Compare that to the one just underneath it, which is the underfed ones. So they have 2 lambs as well, which are significantly lighter, just 6.4 kilos for the combined weight of the 2 lambs. But look at all the colostrum they're producing. It's 160 mil, which is really very, very poor. And even after 18 hours, they're catching up, but they've only still produced half the amount of colostrum that the well-fed group have. And like a 5 kilo lamb in the first 20 will need 1 litre of colostrum in the first 24 hours of life. So how are those sheep going to do it? Just to put this into sort of visual terms, this is your underfed ewes, what they've produced on the left-hand side, and this is on the right-hand side, the well-fed ewes. So I think you'll agree the well-fed ewes have produced significantly more colostrum. Just talking about concentrates versus silage, with that rumen being reduced, it's easier to get a lot of energy in there from our concentrates. I know our silages are getting drier, and we'll look at that in a moment. But basically, our concentrates are 86% dry matter, and that's where all the feeding is. There's no feeding value in moisture or water, so it's easier to get more energy in there with the concentrates than it is the silage. Okay, Shannon. So with sort of a focus on that of trying to get slightly heavier birth weights in our twin lambs and producing good quality colostrum, how do we do that? So what are we looking for really in a good ewe ration? In a good ewe ration, the core of it would be a good cereal base, which will be barley, wheat or maize, and that's where our energy is going to come from. And those are our 3 main energy sources, which are really good. We don't want them too finely ground up if they're in a blend. The problem with grinding these up too fine is that they really can cause acidosis. I know some of these feeds will be in a pellet as opposed to a blend, but very, very finely ground up, because there's a lot of starch in these, it can cause acidosis very quickly. Soybean meal should really be the main protein source in our ration, and this in protein, in comparison to other proteins, is really our Rolls Royce of all proteins. It and protected soya. Protected soya is really soybean meal that's been coated with stuff to let more of it go into the fourth stomach or the abomasum of the animal. It's also called a bypass protein. It just leaves higher levels of digestible undegradable protein, which is more effective at producing better quality colostrum. So soybean meal and protected soya should really be the two main sources of protein. There can be a bit of rapeseed in there as well. And really with these high laminin percentages, those are the proteins you should really be chasing or have them in your ration. Any of these good rations with your good energy source and a good protein source, they need something to balance them up, and they're not fully balanced unless you've got a good fiber there. And these fibers will largely come from things like sugar beet, soya hulls, or citrus. Now, citrus probably isn't as common as what it used to be, but soya hulls and sugar beet will probably form the two main ones. Things to avoid. Sorry, maybe I should say, soya hulls and fiber sources, you put too much of them, and especially soya hulls, they start to become a filler, as opposed to, there's an adequate or an optimum amount. And really, soya hulls in most rations at 150 kilos or 15% is probably the optimum level. Once you start to put in more than that, it's only starting to fill the ration up with more fiber, which is slightly lower in energy. Things you want to avoid there in feeds, I've just listed some things there: oat feed and sunflower. Oat feed, if you take a barley, wheat and maize, your oat feed in comparison to them will only have half the energy in it that the oat feed will only have half the energy that your typical maize might have or your wheat might have. So it's really very low. And I think it's an ME of in around 6-ish, which is very, very low. Like if you take your silage, a good silage 11 to 12, oat feeds again half of that. So like very, very low. You don't want it in there. The other thing in a good yo ration is getting more common protected fats. What is a protected fat? A protected fat is a fat, again, that can go into the fourth stomach of the animal, that can stay intact basically and digested in the fourth stomach. We can't put, if we add too much fat, just ordinary fat to our ration, it starts to interfere with fiber digestion. But protected fat is like a smart fat. It can go into the fourth stomach of the animal, it's digested down there, and can release a massive amount of energy. These are typically 3 times, there's 3 times in every kilo, there's 3 times the amount of energy in a protected fat that would be in your barley, wheat or maize. Roughly speaking, it's about 33 to 36 megajoules of energy per kilo. So they really are very, very high in energy. And 2 versions then might be things like Megalec or Max Fat. Definitely more common in the more expensive rations. The downside of that all is it'll put a lot of extra energy into the ration, but it's going to add a fair bit of, a reasonable amount more cost to the whole thing. Again, if you've got a high laminin percentage flock or sheep which are hard to keep condition on, this may be a way of getting more energy into them and holding body score. Selenium and vitamin E are at higher levels than what they would have been 15 years ago. Your selenium typically now is 0.5 milligrams per kilogram, and your vitamin E 100 to 150. Like those are well up on where they were in the past, and we can talk about that in a moment. Just again, trying to break up these feeds into different sources, proteins, energies, and fibers. Your best quality proteins there are definitely your soybean meal and your protected soya. You will see rapeseed to some level, probably further down your feed label than what your protein will be. Maize distillers listed there as a protein in blue. It's also an energy source. Distillers, I've put a wee asterisk beside it there because it will appear in some meals out there. We need to be careful with that one. It has a high copper content, or can have a high copper content, and some breeds are fairly sensitive to copper toxicity. The guys that are supplying this will tell us now that it's obviously coming from the distillery. It's a distillery byproduct. They're telling us that it's actually coming from stainless steel vats as opposed to copper vats. If it comes from a copper vat where it's distilled, it's absorbing some of the copper out of the vat, and that there lies the problem. Other proteins we can see there, maize gluten. You could argue maize gluten is a sort of an energy as well, and sunflower is listed down there, and sunflower, we'll come to that one later, it's a particularly pure one. Energies, as mentioned earlier, in the green box down here: barley, wheat, oats, beet pulp, maize distillers, maize gluten, yellow meal or maize, very good. And I've mentioned about the oils there and protected fats. The fiber sources: beet pulp, citrus, soya hulls, oats, and straw. Okay, Shannon, next slide, please. Sort of examining the feed label, picking up the phone as I've put down here and asking just basically a price isn't really the best approach. We should really be asking the guys on the phone when we're looking for meal, how much soya and cereals is in the ration. protein levels are easy manipulated. You know what I mean? It's easy for some, not all of them do this obviously, but you know, it's easy to keep a high protein in the ration, put in a high protein, but it's the amount of soy I really want to know what's in the ration and the amount of cereals in it. And good compounders out there will actually give us a list, could actually give us a list of the ingredients or give us a fair idea of how much soy and cereals in the ration, which is what we really need. Okay, so this is just a wee example of this thing we talked about, sunflower. Sunflower is 36% protein, so you could put a fair bit of that in and bring the protein and the content of the ration, the EU ration, up significantly. And you know, you wouldn't be looking on the label that it's any way different, because on the label the compounders don't actually have to declare the energy. But look at the energy level in sunflower; it's absolutely pathetic. Like soybean meal is good there; it's 52% protein, but it's also very, very high energy at 13.5. Sunflower is high protein; it's a really bad protein, but the energy is 9.5. When we're talking about silages earlier on, that sunflower energy, it's not even comparable. It's on par with bad silage. So that's how poor it is. It's something we really need to watch out for. Just the feed label itself, then, when you go to get meal, it'll always come with some sort of a label, and we'll have to be fit to look at this and see what if the compounder won't give us a rough idea of what's in it and what percentages of soybean. Like typically, soybean could be in at 20% or 200 kilos per ton. You know, so these things are listed with the highest, the ingredients are in the highest level listed at the start, and then go down to the ones that are the lowest. So your minerals will always be down near the end. Minerals are typically in the 25 kilos per ton. This is quite a good ration. Like it's high pro soy is listed there. We've got our energies, our maize, our rolled barley. Maybe the hulls, soybean hulls is slightly up there. Maybe you would argue it should be slightly further down the list. But there is sugar beet down there as well. There's other things in this one there you can see, like megalec protected fat, which will help the energy overall. Interesting, they've put in NutriPro in this one, which is saying like it's a fish meal replacer, and that basically is like a protected soya that I mentioned earlier on. But I suppose every meal company's got their own spin on what way they put the stuff down on the label. But that overall will be quite a good ration. If you're not happy, you know, with your label and what you think you're getting, there's nothing to stop you making up your own rations. And these are just like two, or even taking a situation like this here where you've got two rations, take them to your meal company and they can make them up for you. You know, the one on the left is a fairly basic ration. You know, it's basically made up of 500 kilos of barley as a main energy source. There's a bit of soybean there at a high level and some sugar beet. These rations probably will come out quite expensive this year because of the price of barley, and we'll come to that later. But they're fairly typical rations that we as advisors would, you know, can recommend. The one on the right has a bit of protected soya thrown into it there as well, and molasses maybe to help with the dust. And molasses can be added to rations typically at 25 to 50 kilos would be the normal run. Okay, Sam. Sorry, just go back to the last one again. Sorry. I've said there, one thing I forgot to say is lightly rolled barley in both of them. The barley can be fed whole to sheep, but if you're going to feed it whole, you really have to feed it along with a very dry silage or with hay. It's to do with just the way the sheep digest it. Once it's fed with something that's high dry matter, they seem to be fit to digest it better. If it's fed with very wet, silage, they tend to put out more and not digest it. Okay, Shannon, thank you. Really, what I want to look at now is just a map of soil selenium and talk a little bit about selenium and selenium deficiencies. We talked about in our label the level of selenium and vitamin E we should have in our meals these days. So what we have here is a map of Northern Ireland, as you can all see, and if we look, basically the orange areas are the areas within Northern Ireland that are actually high in selenium, but selenium deficiency is becoming a bigger problem. And if you look basically south of Lough Neagh, a lot of areas just south of that are actually deficient. Those areas in purple and sort of turquoise colour there. I know in my area, as an advisor, which is in Armagh and Dungannon, we're having a lot of problems with selenium deficiency. If the soil levels are low in selenium, it's very likely the forage grows that's going to be low as well, and we're going to have issues. Okay, so there was studies done, I think, about 10, 12 years ago in Hillsborough, and they were looking at selenium in their ewe flock. And what they found was supplemented ewes needed less assistance at lambing. The lambs from supplemented ewes had lower mortality rates at lambing. They were heavier. The ewes that were supplemented had heavier lambs at weaning, 1.6 kilos heavier. Look, folks, you're only going to get that a benefit if you are deficient. If you're not deficient, you're not going to get that. What I have found in my experience out there, as I said, there's pockets of Northern Ireland which are very deficient, obviously, from that map. And within my own group, the time within the BDGs at the start, whenever we could do some blood sampling, we find a lot of our flocks within our BDG groups were very low. And what we're really finding is it's the very progressive farmers that tend to be getting this, and it's more common within reseeding and land improvement. And those advisors were telling farmers to put on sulfur along with the fertilizer to get a better uptake, but the sulfur could actually be one of the biggest, possibly one of the biggest culprits for actually locking selenium down in the soil as well and not letting it come up. So it's something maybe need to do a bit more work on that one. Okay, Shannon. Just a wee chart there in body score that Rachel talked about earlier on. Just to see it there, there's a hill ewe section, an upland ewe section, and a lowland ewe section. You know, ewes are going to be in better condition this year. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of more grass about. There hasn't really been any early frosts. The grass has kept growing. I would say sheep on average, the ones I've seen certainly are, I would say they're a quarter body score, if not a half body score better than in other years. A lot of all these figures that we as advisors churn out, they're based on a 70 kilo ewe. I know in the lowland, a lot of our ewes, they're a lot heavier than 70 kilos. Like we were doing a dosing night one night, and we actually put a sheep on the weighbridge, and I got the guys to guess what weight she was, and a lot of farmers said that sheep's 85, 90 kilos. In actual fact, the sheep turned out to be 105 kilos. So it's something we, as everybody needs to be aware of. Get some ewes weighed and actually see what weight they are. An extra body score in a ewe will put an extra 12 kilos on her, and so a half body score is going to put an extra 6 kilos on her. So when we're dosing or we're feeding her, we need to take that into account. And certainly in the lowland, there's men that don't mind having big ewes about them, and they don't know actually how big they are. Okay, look, next slide here's the feeding rate of twin bearing ewes in a body score 3. So it's a typical feeding chart, this, and I'm sure you've all seen these before, with precision chop silage in the center, with our excellent quality and our poor quality, and our big bale silage on the right hand side. If we take our excellent quality silage on the precision end of things here, so it's the second column from the left, you're starting to feed them 4 weeks before the lamb, because the silage is so good you don't need to supplement them as soon, and you're kicking off there at 0.35 kilos and working your way up to half a kilo a day before lambing. So the silage is doing a heck of a lot of good work there. You're not having to supplement a lot of meal along with that at all. That's fine. And Rachel and Shannon, I think, have both mentioned about farmers and their silage quality. I've seen that as an advisor from I've started. Farmers are taking great pride in their silage now and really, really going to great lengths to make really good silage. A lot more reseeding going on, putting better grasses in it, getting it cut at the right stage. And like it shows there, the total amount fed to those ewes pre-lambing is only 12 kilos, which is a very, very low amount, but that's actually do a good enough job. Compare that to our traditional type guy that takes one big cut, which is our poorer quality stuff, with an ME of 9.6. Like he's having to start to feed them at 6 weeks before lambing and at 0.4 kilos a day and work his way up to 1 kilo. And like he's feeding 29 kilos for those sheep lamb, which is over double what the guy in the good silage is feeding. So that's a seriously big difference. You might ask, out on the right hand side, the guy with big bale silage here, again it's excellent quality, 11.7 ME. Why is he having to feed 21 kilos in total? And it really comes down to chop length. It's longer in length, and the ewes can't get sufficient intake from that, so you're having to feed more meal to supplement that. Folks, that's only a pre-lambing chart of what meal's fed. I mean, ewes sometimes are fed at March lambing, depending on the availability of grass and whatnot. Could be fed after lambing, obviously, as well, and early lambing flocks will be fed as well. But that's, for the purposes of tonight, I've just focused on pre-lambing and trying to work out some costs from that. Okay, send the next slide, please. That's just taking the from the last slide through into try and work out a cost here. So this blue table is looking at a concentrate cost for different times. So it's costed per ewe. So really, in November, it says there late 2020, the meal was £2.75 a tonne, and that 12 kilos of meal was going to cost us £3.30 a ewe. 1 year on, where we are now, in or at least our figures were done on the 1st of November, it was going to cost £3.78 per ewe. Okay, so we're feeding very little meal. 12 kilos is not a lot, and I'm trying to put an estimate of where the meal price might be come the early 22, just in the new year, and I've added on £10 a tonne. It's an estimate. I really don't know what way it's going to go. I know meal price is going to go up, but how much is anybody's guess. So it's still not putting the meal price per ewe up an awful lot. It's taking it up there to £3.90. On a 200 ewe flock, that's working back from £660 for the flock. It'll take it up to 780 if the meal price goes up to what I think it could do. That guy that's making that good silage and only feeding 12 kilos of meal, that guy, even with those meal prices, he's still got a very resilient flock there, and it's not having a massive impact on his business overall. You know, those figures are sort of showing that, like, it's only putting them up slightly because he's making such good silage. He can really, you know, the price of meal is certainly having an effect, but it's not massive. If we compare that to the green table here, where he's feeding 29, the different farmer that's having to feed 29 kilos, cost per ewe in late 2020 is just shy of £8, you may say, and that will could move up to just shy of £9.50 come 2022. And the cost then for a 200 ewe flock in late 2020 would be just shy of £1,600 in there, £1,594, moving up to £1,884. So you can see the benefits here of good silage. They can't be overstated, and those are just some simple costs associated with that. Just a wee look at some of the spot prices where we are on. Work these out on the 1st of November for the 2 years. Barley, you know, a year ago you may say was 194 a tonne. A spot price for barley a few weeks ago was 275. So it's 41.7% of a change, which is I don't think a lot of people seen that one coming. Don't forget, a lot of guys, compounders, will have pre-bought some of these, or forward bought these things, which will soften the price a bit. But the guys that are buying on spot prices from Belfast will have to endure a lot of these spot prices, and barley's going to be a better pill to swallow. And like it can form a fair bit of a ewe ration, although we can put maize in. But in the pig and poultry world, where barley and wheat are used a lot, it's gonna create a lot of problems there. Wheat's the next one. It's up 26%. It's at 278. Maize is 269, where a year ago it was 220, so it's 22% up. Gluten was 225, it's 271. It's 20% of a rise, you must say. Distillers is up 10%. Soya is the one I've put in green here, and the reason why I've put it in green is the one actually has went down. It was crazy last year and it's come back to 370 or thereabouts, so it's actually back 11%. And rapeseed is up 18. I suppose the only thing we can take from that whole table is that the good thing is that soya is coming back, and that maize is our best energy source out of barley and wheat, and maize is the best one, and it's actually now the cheapest of the three. So that's the only silver lining in the whole thing, but they're all have went up in price. Okay, Shannon. Sort of like reducing the meal bill then. Well, we've seen how to do that already from that wee feeding chart that I put up a moment ago. But you definitely have to get your silage analysed to see what you have, and feed your best silage to your ewes. Know the weight of your ewes. As I said 5 minutes ago, if we don't know the weight of them, you know what I mean, a lot of people will just assume it's a 70 kilo ewe they have, but there's some, in the lowland, there's some very heavy ewes out there, and those sheep will need more meal. Feed according to scan and body score, silage quality. Don't skimp on the meal quality. Get a good ration made up. Examine your label on your meal. Talk to your compounder. He could tell you what's in it. Those twin and triplet bearing ewes need good stuff. You know, those spot prices of meal went up. Does that mean we try and get meal bought before the new year? You know, it's hard to say what they're going to go up. Is it £10 a ton? Is it less? Is it more? I don't really know. I haven't got a crystal ball. All I can tell you is highly unpredictable. I've put down there, consider the benefits of a buying group. You know, back about 10 years ago, and I think it's still going, there was a Tyrone Quality Lamb group, buying group, and it was fit to say to some of the local meal compounders, look, we have so many members, we'll take X number of tons a year, and there's our ration, make it up for us, or give us a best price for it. And that worked really, really well. They were getting a really tremendous ration at a reasonable price. And maybe that's something that farmers should look to do more often, is buy actually stuff in a group. Another way of reducing the meal bill, try and get grass growing early in the new year, or when you know the grass starts to grow. But again, that can be expensive too with the price of fertilizer. But there's other options there, your slurry, your digestate, and all that type of stuff too. And last but not least down there is consider late lambing. You know, how do we, if meal's going to continue to go up and go up even more, how do we take meal to a large extent out of the whole sheep production? And that might mean lambing sheep in May, where really you can winter them cheaply, either in winter grazing or in the house and silage, where they don't need any meal, and put them out onto grass when the grass is growing, and that'll provide all the energy they require, and lamb them on grass, and possibly even selling the lambs on as stores. Just a wee bit, 2 slides to finish off on then. Pattern of allocation, Rachel maybe covered this already. You know, the amount to feed, once you really go over £1 a day, you're going to have to split your feed into two feeds a day. Obviously, total mixed rations alleviate any problems. The problem with feeding one big feed in a day is it can trigger acidosis, especially with a ration with so much starch in it, and a very finely ground up a ration is more likely to cause acidosis in a bigger feed. There's been a bit of work done on acidosis, possibly can lead to more prolapse, maybe due to lack of room and movement. But again, this is not really proven. Okay, send the next slide. Just the last one to finish on here. Back a number of years ago, a study in the south of Ireland showed that really 60% of ewes get the correct amount of feed, 20% were getting too much, and 20% were getting too little. All I can say, folks, is provide, and Rachel is just reiterating what she said earlier on, provide plenty of truck space if you can. It's all right saying that. When men put sheep in the house, they bung the whole thing in a lot of times, and it's easy saying this, but provide enough truck space so you can. Look out for shy feeders. Pull them out and put them in with your triplet ewes if you can. And again, don't forget the condition score. And you can see there the recommendations there for the different weights of ewes and the meal feeding area, and the area required for slots, and the ad lib feeding area as well. And I think that's the last one, Shannon, is it?
That's it, Brian. Thank you very much.
Okay.
A lot of information there, folks, and I say that don't be worrying. This is being recorded and will be available hopefully in the next few days on the CAFRE TV YouTube page. So, folks, we're just literally down to the last slide here. If Dermot's still there, we just bring him back in if he's about. So there's a lot of good man, Dermot. A lot of good messages there, folks. Like all these events, we always leave you a few things to think about when you take home. Obviously, some of the things we can work during the year, but the soil testing, folks. People may say, well, why are we talking about it now? Well, now is actually coming up to Christmas time, 3 months after you last spread organic manures or fertilizer, is an ideal time to get your soil tested. That, especially now with the predicted price of fertilizer, it's been reported. Get lime on if it's necessary. So if you're doing nothing else, get soil tested in the next short period. As Dermot does, as said, and Brian has reiterated there, condition score your ewes, but do it throughout the year. Don't be just waiting until they're going to the tip or they're about to meal feed them or whatever, you know, you need to be keeping a handle on them throughout the year as much as you can. As I say, all this is about grass and utilising grass and making the most out of quality grass that Dermot has been showing, and you know, that's only as good as you're measuring grass throughout the year, that you have the confidence to take some of that good quality grass out, either in the form of bales or put it into the pit. And then last, nearly finished, the label that Brian has mentioned, especially this year, ask the questions, you know, read the label. You know, what it's called one year may not be what it's in next year. So, you know, question your meal merchant, especially this year with the prices, and I'm sure we'll have questions to that later on. But the last point, going to leave to Dermot there. Maybe Dermot, you could finish off with.
Definitely get your silage tested and feed according to the results. Don't assume it's good.
Exactly. Dermot, thank you very much. Folks, thank you very much for the time. Say we've there's a lot of information out there, but I say it has been recorded. So all I can say is thank you very much. Thank you very much to Brian and Rachel and Gareth and Pam in the background for this bit. We're now on to questions. So hand it back over to Gareth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, everyone. 3 excellent presentations there. I'm sure you'll agree. Certainly lots of food for thought, and giving us some useful information to plan ahead for the next few months. Excellent earlier on to see Dermot and Rachel putting that into practice and getting out good and early with the silage core to analyse the silage to see what they're working with. There's plenty of questions, folks. Thank you very much for everyone sending them in. So I'm going to get straight to it. I'll start off with bringing in Darren Carty from the Irish Farmers Journal, if that's okay. I have a nice, easy one for you to start with you here, Darren. There's 2 parts to it. With fertiliser likely to be dear next spring, what advice would you give for making good quality silage next year? And the second part of that, have you any insight into what way meal and fertiliser prices are going to go next year? So,
Gareth, nice and easy one to start. I'll start with the easiest one first, so I'll take the second part of it first. I suppose, look, it's a very tricky one, because one of the things that some of the importers are saying to us is that there's such a high level of money involved at the moment that they are not in a position to take all of the risk. And some of them highlighted, say, 2009 as an example, where the fertilizer prices would have been high this time of the year. There was high volumes brought in, and in the summer prices crashed and they were left with, say, significant losses. But that was the differential between where prices were and where prices are now is probably at twice its level. So I would be worried, say, about the volumes that's going to be in the country early in the year. There's no doubt that as the year goes on, the prices probably will come back a bit, and that's just on the basis of supply and demand. And that if there's less demand because of the price, well, then you probably will see a slight weakening, but I think that will be well into next year before you see any weakening. And the advice that seems to be coming out now is to at least talk to your merchants to sort of have an idea of how much you need, and try and maybe tie in even with a small portion to get you going at the start of the year, and not to leave you totally exposed, because you could get into a situation of just physically getting your hands on something. It's one thing having to pay a high price for it, but it's another if you can't actually get the volume or get your hands on what you want. So that's the one area I'd be talking about first. In regards making good quality silage, look, that's going to be a tricky one. And I think there's a lot of things at play at the moment. And one of the things I'd be doing is seeing the grass you have as a reserve in starting off next spring into lower and take the pressure off, say, the fertilizer or concentrate costs. But you've seen the impact on Dermot's system, you've seen the figures there, the very good figures Brian showed up. Even at the cost of where fertilizer is, it still is cheaper than poor quality silage. And that's going to hold a ring through right throughout next year, even with the higher fertilizer costs. Because there's nothing to say that we won't be in a situation of high concentrate prices next back in as well, that everything would point that there isn't going to be any, say, big falling back. So I would be doing, I suppose, maybe doing your sums, getting your soil tested, putting out lime to get better utilization or better value out of the fertilizer you put out, but still going for your good quality silage, because I think you can't afford not to given the repercussions that could have in 2023.
Excellent, Darren. Thank you very much. I'll go over to Brian. There's a couple of questions for Brian. We'll start off with there's two questions actually on selenium deficiency. The first one, Brian, how do I know if I have a selenium deficiency in my flock, and what's the best way to treat it? Another question from someone else slightly related. They have a selenium deficiency and fed buckets last year. Is buckets the best option? What's your thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, the best way I find out if you've got selenium deficiency is really to get a blood sample from your vet, and he will tell you on what level it's at. Look, the one thing I didn't say, and the one downside of making that the good silage, is we're putting in less meal, and the meal is actually a good form of actually, there's plenty of selenium in it, but we're actually cutting back on the amount of meal. So what I would be saying there is, maybe if pre-lambing, we should be saying to the meal manufacturer, I want, instead of 25 kilos of minerals in per ton, I want 50 kilos in. So although we're feeding less meal, we're getting more selenium into that way. That's one way of doing it. The selenium that comes in your meal is in the form of a sodium selenide, which it really has to be fed them every day. There's other seleniums in there. Some of the better meals will actually have things in it called Celplex, which is organic selenium. It's a selenium yeast, and it's fit to be stored in the body a lot easier than our cheap sodium selenide. We can use that as in the meal as well, and it's not that much more expensive to put that in. Selenium deficiency can actually come. People can get caught out with this, because what I'm finding is a lot of farmers now, they're going further afield for winter grazing, and when they go maybe 20 miles away to get winter grazing, that creates a whole pile of other problems from that they don't really, anticipate. We talked about fluke earlier on. I know guys that have taken winter grazing, and sheep have come back with a lot of fluke in them. They've also come back with selenium deficiency, and those things maybe they've never encountered in their home farm. So we need to be aware of those flocks may be managed as a micro flock in many ways. What some people would be doing, another way of bringing up the selenium would be actually to bolus their sheep at least 4 to 5 weeks before lambing, and that's a very good way of bringing up the selenium levels, where the bolus goes into them, and it leaches out a certain amount of selenium every day, and there's a bit of iodine in that as well, and sometimes cobalt as well, and that's a good way of bringing up the levels. But basically, selenium is a muscle disease. You'll see it in fast-growing single lambs too. It's a mobility issues. Yolks don't open properly at lambing as well, and it will affect the overall growth rates as well. I think, does that answer the question? Does it?
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
Sorry, buckets. Buckets aren't probably the best way of addressing a selenium problem. It's better with a bolus, I would have thought.
Yeah. One more question when we're on with you, Brian. What is the best way to buy a yo feed pellet or blend?
Yeah, I like that question. Obviously, guys that are feeding TMR stuff, total mixed rations, a blend is fine for them. I suppose the thing we need to watch in a blend, that it's not very, very finely ground up, and that's the big issue with all this high level of starch in it. A lot of maize, a lot of barley. That starch can cause acidosis if we're feeding it at higher levels, more particularly maybe after lambing. Obviously, you've got good silage, we're only feeding a limited amount before lambing. Where a pellet, you might not get that because it's a bigger area. It takes longer to break down the rumen and this very powdery stuff. So it's generally down to a lot of personal preference. I suppose if you're feeding outside in trucks, a blend can become, in wet trucks, can become wet and sticky, where pellets are probably, it doesn't happen as much to them.
Very good, thank you, Brian. We'll go back to the start, back to Dermot. There's a couple of questions for yourself, Dermot. The first question's relatively straightforward. How often do you condition score your yos? I think you mentioned when you're talking about your scanning rate, you put a lot of that down to a good body condition score. So how often, maybe throughout the year, would you do that?
I say just every time the ewes are in, just run your hand through them just to see how they're doing.
Very good. Any other aspects maybe that you'd attribute to your high scanning rate? Because we've seen from the graph there, it was consistently quite good.
I suppose it's a combination of a lot of things. Like I have started bolusing use with selenium and cobalt and iodine. Also, maybe a bit harder on NAM to use culling that to try and get that out of the flock. You know, I think it's not in lamb, she's not kept. Except if she's a hog, just give her a chance maybe.
Very good. Keep them cold out. One other question when we're on with you. What was the grassland mixture we seen that photograph in your reseed? Maybe perhaps Dan maybe wants to come in on that one as well, maybe.
Oh, wait a see. I think I have that. Yes, it was mainly a silage sward. It had a wee bit of clover in it. It was mainly Aber mixtures. Aber Magic, Aber Green, Aber Wolf, and Aber Day. So, say if anybody wants any further information on that, I'm sure you can give us a shout. But that's the ones that Dermot's been using now, I think, for a while, and happy enough with them, Dermot.
Yes, happy enough.
Very good. Moving on to Rachel, a couple of questions on silage analysis. How often should farmers be testing their silage throughout the winter, Rachel?
That's a good question, Gareth. I would say if they can, they should test the silage on a monthly basis. Obviously, there's variability factors in there, and it's also just to determine the stability of the product as you move back through the silo as well. So, you know, for folks that are in a business development group, if the advisor is coming out onto your farm, you know, do ask them to bring the machine along if it's possible, and you can get it done there and then on the spot. For other folks out there, you know, their meal rep should be able to help with the provision of that service for them.
Absolutely. One other question for yourself, Rachel, if you want to take it. Clamp silage versus bale silage for sheep. What's the main differences or benefits there?
Well, I suppose Brian, during his presentation already highlighted the main differences between your pit and your bale, but ultimately for your pregnant Joe, the precision chop pit silage is the best that you can get for them. So when it comes to the bales, the feed value of that is going to be determined both on the analysis and obviously the chop length as well. So if we think specifically of chop length, that was the one thing that was affecting the amount of feed that actually had to be added in as well. So the two silages that Brian showed were comparable in terms of their analysis. However, the higher concentrate input was needed with the big bale, the good quality big bale silage, and that was required to compensate really for the chop length.
Very good, Rich. Thank you. I'm just conscious of time, folks. There's some questions still coming in. I'll take one more question, and I'll hand that to Darren Carty and let him have the final one, if that is okay, Darren. Someone, I think it was Rachel, mentioned earlier about high covers. What would you recommend maybe to a farmer that still has high covers available, maybe higher than usual this time of year? Would you recommend them grazing those, or is they maybe safer keeping those to the springtime? What's your thoughts on that, Darren?
Yeah, I suppose Garrett, he has to weigh up a few things, say what other covers he has on the farm. If he does have, say, some grass there, he's lambing date, what the stocking rate is, and actual what the cover is. You could get covers, say, of 1800, 2000, or say, or maybe up in sort of 10, 12 centimeters grass height, and they could hold if you did have, I suppose, maybe a good spring, but on the general run, they won't hold and they go yellow, and they might lose some of the quality. But if you're at a grass height of sort of 7 to 9 centimeters, I'd have no bother in say holding them over the winter, because they're going to be your reserve that you're going to have next year that'll reduce the concentrate cost majorly in early spring. That if you look at the cost of, say, early spring grass versus concentrates at the cost of buying, say, outlying there, you're looking at a 4 to 1 saving. So it's a 4-fold increase in feeding your yoke with concentrates if you don't have grass. So what I'd be sort of saying, if there is heavy covers, some farmers have done this, is that if they're very heavy, they've maybe closed other areas that they would have been anticipating and maybe getting a final grazing on, and then maybe grazed them areas. Maybe some people have gone in and taken a light sort of grazing off it, but I wouldn't be coming in and skinning them out knowing that you're walking yourself into a deficit next spring, because if concentrate costs are going to be high, fertilizer costs are going to be high, and also supply issues. I prefer to have some bit of a reserve of even average quality grass besides having none at all.
Thank you very much, Darren. Folks, I'm just conscious of time and getting finished whenever we said we would. So we're going to wrap it up there now. There may be some other burning questions we didn't get to. However, if you are in a BDG, please contact your advisor if you have any further questions. I'd also just like to reiterate what Rachel said. If you are a BDG member, please avail of the NAR scanners that are out there. It's a free service for BDG members. Contact your advisor and arrange to get your silage tested in the coming weeks. As all the speakers have highlighted there this evening, that could then be the starting point to develop your winter feed plan. And as Brian highlighted very well there, we know from the benchmarking at CAFRE, lamb sold per ewe is the key driver behind profitability in any sheep farm, and having that good winter feed plan is the fundamental part of preparing for a successful lambing and maximising that. So thank you very much, folks. If you have any questions in relation to the Northern Ireland Sheep Programme, please contact either Senan or Darren. You can find out more about the programme on the CAFRE website or the CAFRE Facebook page. Please note that Event 9 of the NI Sheep Programme will aim to take place in spring 2022. Further details of this will be available in the near future. And finally, I just want to thank everyone that was involved in your help and support in preparing for tonight. And delivering it. As I mentioned earlier, we have a short survey for you to help us improve these events going forward. So once the event is completed, please don't shut down and the survey will appear automatically. Thank you.